Welcome. Thank you so much for joining us today. This is a new edition of Coffee with Corvirtus coming from the relatively beginning, about a couple weeks into the COVID-19 pandemic. At the Corvirtus team, we're working completely virtually, and we just thought it would be great, just as we as a team try to connect virtually. We really want to connect with all of you and anyone in the greater human resources, leadership, industrial organizational psych communities about some things that we're thinking about. So Sam, I know that you've been reading a few articles lately, and I have as well. I guess I could get started.
Sure, yeah, that's perfectly fine.
Okay, fantastic. So one thing I know, I've had this happened twice. I've had a couple annual meetings canceled. And so I started just kind of looking at the research on that and what some of the ramifications are. Obviously, there's key financial implications with being a major organization, whether it's the Society of Industrial Organizational Psychology or a lot of major health groups like radiology, oncology, whatever. I present often at an urgent care meeting, and their annual meeting got canceled as well. But so what are the implications to your group identity, to your professional identity of having those collective events canceled? So I found an article that was kind of interesting, and we'll cite everything below in our show notes here on YouTube, that talked about the importance of emotional synchrony. So emotional synchrony is when you have that high, so to speak. Ideally, it's a high at your conference where you're feeling really connected with everyone and that you're all on the same page and just really positive about what you do as a field. And they looked at this within scouting and within nonprofits, and they found that having those moments, even 10 weeks later, increases your self-esteem and just your overall self-efficacy and your efficacy or perceptions of your ability to contribute and do things as a person in the field and just as a group. So that might be something that, in addition to all the other ramifications that these groups are having to deal with right now of canceling their meetings, in the spring is such a big time to have these conventions, that could influence, how trying to find virtual ways beyond having a virtual conference, but how do you have that, create that emotional synchrony maybe in smaller bites throughout the year to compensate for not having that annual meeting? Sam, what do you think about that?
Yeah, definitely. I think that's a really great point. Obviously, with in our field with the PSYOP conference having recently been canceled, it's a tremendous opportunity each year for everyone to be able to network in person, reconnect, kind of share ideas or strategies that they're implementing in their workplaces or that they've helped other organizations implement that they've seen tremendous results. And so going off of your point with that self-efficacy piece, I think what could also be said is that not having those in-person opportunities can really hinder the value that you feel about yourself and kind of the work that you're doing too. So really having those opportunities, whether it's in person or now even more so than ever, those virtual opportunities to connect, share your ideas with others in your network can be really impactful for pushing change and different ideas forward.
Yeah, I totally agree. So yeah, when you go to those meetings, you're able to share your shared frustrations or common experiences, and not having that could really affect people, especially as we're dealing with this kind of tragic situation across the country and the world. Yeah. Sam, what have you been reading about lately?
So a couple of things that I've been looking at recently. I had actually posted a couple of things this week and last week just around company reputation, around being able to lead with empathy. So I'll briefly touch on that here, but just how brand reputation, stakeholder loyalty can be affected based upon company actions and their level of proactivity, which is especially relevant now during a crisis, and just as well as the importance of empathy during this time and why it's here to stay in the workplace even beyond once we move out of this unpredictable and challenging time. So I just wanted to share a few of my thoughts. Really, this pandemic has totally changed the way that most organizations operate. Many have responded and acted quickly, adjusting their business model and operations to ensure that they're continuing to generate revenue, setting employees up to work from home, keeping them informed, ensuring that they have the resources to be successful during this time. Other organizations have been much slower to take action to communicate with or care for their people. And then, as we know, some just simply aren't as fortunate as others with the resources that they can allocate to their people. But for those companies, it's not necessarily for a lack of empathy or compassion or understanding of the situation. So I think it's important to note that as well. But the main point that I really want to make is that the way in which and the urgency with which, organizations have acted and responded so far to the situation could really impact their brand reputation going forward. So how consumers like Jen and I view them, how their partners, their vendors, and their suppliers view them, even how their own employees view them. And so I think Jen would agree that, we understand many organizations have simply been forced into a tight spot right now, and they don't really have a choice but to maybe lay people off permanently, temporarily, make pay cuts just to keep themselves afloat. But I really think that, for those organizations that have the resources to care for their people and have not seemingly taken this situation seriously, or who have been just very slow to respond and act, not only does that have the potential to affect their reputation, but it really can impact the trust and loyalty and commitment of the people who work for them, who have made their culture what it is, as well as their success and sustainability possible.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. And the idea of empathy kind of gets at something that I was reading about, which is authenticity. And my cat is actually about to join me, which kind of gets at another area of authenticity with, being authentic about what you're going through right now and really truly sharing what you feel. So as we communicate more virtually, a lot more virtually right now, and Hemi is going to go up on my desk, it's very important that we first use rich forms of communication whenever we can. So it might be easy in a crisis to I'm going to just send this email, send this through text message, or instant messaging, any number of things. But when you're working virtually, it's using those lean media forms of communication. That is more damaging than if you're in an environment where I occasionally get to see you. So essentially, I could pop off a text message to you or an instant message or an email, and you may think it's maybe a little bit out of place or not quite understand, but it's not going to be as damaging because typically we see each other face to face so much and we're in the same office. If I'm doing that a lot now that we're all working from home, the damage is going to be a lot greater to our trust of each other and to having helpful and productive relationships. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that when I perceive that maybe, let's say, Sam isn't being authentic in his message, that directly affects and more strongly affects productive behavior and performance in a virtual environment. So really the main takeaway is being perceived as authentic is incredibly important right now when we're all restricted to these virtual forms of communication. And when researchers looked at, and we'll again have all the research below, what is causing that, it's mostly affecting trust. So that when we're communicating virtually, if I perceive that you're being authentic, both that you're sharing everything that you need to share, you're not suppressing any feelings or thoughts that you might have, then I'm going to trust you more. We're going to be more likely to help each other. And then that's going to affect our performance. So just some things to keep in mind as we're all having a lot to do and feeling stressed right now, that you're not, that you're maybe taking some time to use some not lean media, some richer media. Some things that we're doing as a team is we've had virtual happy hours. I know I've seen a lot of that on social media, people sharing their video conference rooms with all the little squares, Brady Bunch grids of their team. So that's really wonderful to see. But maybe even if something could be done via email, but let's just have a meeting. Let's have a 20-minute meeting. Right now, my calendar is largely open, or a lot more open than it usually is. So it's not a big deal to schedule those 20 minutes or those 15 minutes. And I found that, and just like we've been doing this for about 2 weeks, that it's incredibly beneficial just to see people, to talk to them, and have that connection. And that surprisingly, when we do that, I don't know how you feel, Sam, but I feel almost as much of a connection as I would if we were, in our conference room or in our office together.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think especially during this time where we all are working virtually and remotely, for an indefinite amount of time, it really is important to keep those lines of communication open, and just also even beyond that, having a variety of methods of communicating too. So like you said, it's really easy to just shoot over a quick email, but if we do have the opportunity to connect face to face, albeit virtually through the computer, that can be really beneficial too, because I know a lot of people like me can get cabin fever really easily, or just like have those feelings of like social isolation. So just being able to have that quick connect and see a person's face and just check in, see how you can support them, can be really powerful during this time for sure.
Absolutely. And then, just being authentic about what you're doing in your life. Like I'm, sharing my office with my 2 cats. And of course, people have children at home, and especially this week in our area, schools are back in session virtually. So parents are managing a lot right now, and everyone is managing a lot. I have a parent that is going through cancer treatments in Indiana. So just a lot of things going on, and having that awareness and that empathy is so critical.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great point. And that actually leads really well into the last thing that I wanted to talk about, which is empathy. So, with that said, whether you're in a position of leadership right now, or if you're just an individual contributor, it's really never been a more important time, as Jen alluded to be able to lead, act, and behave with empathy and compassion towards your people, coworkers, anyone that's helped make and continues to make your organization what it is. People are being affected by this in all different ways right now, and they're also processing it in different ways. And so that can extend to even people who are working on the same team or in the same organization. So, we're dealing with extraordinary levels of stress and anxiety right now. The future of organizations, people's livelihoods might be at risk. And so we don't have a way of knowing how organizations that have been severely impacted, just how they're going to be able to bounce back from this, or what support they might need. So there really has never been a more appropriate time to be able to lead with that kindness, with that compassion, with that empathy. That can come in many forms. So being flexible with scheduling and work hours if it's feasible for your team to do so, being flexible with meeting deadlines if it's appropriate to do so, being able to just help your team manage that work-life balance, or that personal with the work life, because with many of us now working from home, those lines are kind of becoming blended. And so it's becoming increasingly difficult to be able to manage those effectively. But really just simply acknowledging and recognizing that your people might be in a tough spot, just having that presence of mind to reach out to them, that can be really impactful. And of course, just to sprinkle in a bit of research here at the end, because it's always good when research backs up our claims and just what we're talking about. So Jen's background and my background is in industrial organizational psychology. And so research in that field actually shows that managers who demonstrate higher levels of empathy toward their teams are actually viewed as better performers by their superiors. So there's a positive relationship between team members who feel that their leaders are empathetic, kind, and compassionate, and then with the job performance ratings that they receive from their superiors. So I think with all of that said, I think it's safe to say that empathy is, it's here to stay beyond these times, but it's also never been needed more than it is right now in terms of like business execution and just leadership practice.
That's very well put, Sam. And I think empathy starts with that authenticity that we talked about. So sharing what your own concerns are right now, whether you're, like I'm concerned about my mom insisting on grocery shopping when she's ill, even though it's during the senior hour at the beginning of the day, and sharing that with your team. So sometimes in our lunches and our happy hours, or just our meetings, we will share kind of or I'll encourage everyone to share what's going on in their life, talking about different things that, and really making a point to do that. Important during regular business times, but especially right now.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, thank you, Sam, for joining me. And we're both so thrilled to have the opportunity to continue to serve all our clients and keep doing what we do. And if you have any questions or just want to chat, if something inspired you or brought up a concern and you want to talk, please feel free to reach out to us. We're always here to support your success. And we look forward to chatting again soon on the next Coffee with Corvirtus.
Yeah, thanks, everyone.